Welcome. My name is Karen Field-Bullock, and this is lesson number 9 in my course, A Spiritual Path to True Love. Last time I promised you that this lesson would be about love versus marriage. In addition, I'm going to describe love versus selfishness, another major opposition that can destroy both love and marriage. Of course, marriage is a huge topic and not one I'm in a position to cover adequately, but I'd like to encourage you to read books that can help you sort out your thoughts and experiences in marriage. To that end, I've listed 4 books below that I highly recommend. Taken together, these books present a very solid, practical, and hopeful understanding of marriage. You'll read about predictable stages of marriage, different types of stable marriages, how to identify healthy and unhealthy conflict, the changing goals of marriage through history, typical pitfalls of marriage and ways to get back on track, and some of the newest trends and techniques used in successful love relationships today. Marriage is complex at best. One thing is clear though, marriage does not automatically lead to living happily ever after. At first, marriage may bring lots of happiness, and yet sooner or later the structure of marriage or any live-in relationship can bring people down. Committed relationships require practical boundaries and conditions, whereas true love feels unconditional, eternal, even mystical. This clash of freedom versus limitations is a dynamic opposite that provides couples an opportunity to create a relationship masterpiece, like a beautiful work of art. Think of an artist who begins with all the skills learned in a painstaking, structured way through structured classes, and who, within the limitations of his or her skills and materials, exercises the artistic freedom to create an imaginative, amazing painting. In marriage, you have the chance to use the structure of marriage in balance with the freedom inherent in your love and creativity to create a beautiful life together. But again, marriage in many cultures is heavy on rules and roles. First, it's a legal contract delineating rights and responsibilities. Beyond the law, married partners need to agree privately on certain principles and to establish red lines, such as the principle of honesty, or perhaps peace over honesty, and the red line of no cheating, or maybe no shouting. In addition, married partners have to negotiate lots of mundane details like who's going to take out the garbage, who becomes the decider in different situations, who controls the bank accounts, how much freedom each one gets, and so on. Unfortunately, marriage opposes love whenever the rules and limitations of the relationship become overburdening and the social and personal expectations become impossible to fulfill. This puts marriage and love out of balance such that the marriage agreements usually take priority and the love gets squeezed out or has to lurk in the crevices between soccer practice chauffeuring and meeting for dinner at a certain time. In art, that would be like an artist paying more attention to acquiring a large, impressive frame, canvas, and brush than to the creative work of painting a captivating picture. The dynamic opposition of structure versus freedom inherent in love and marriage is similar to the opposition of unconditional love versus conditional love, something we've touched on previously. If you recall, Erich Fromm associated unconditional love with motherly love and conditional love with fatherly love. However, love versus marriage is not gendered. In a marriage, both partners keep track of rules broken, agreements forgotten, and red lines crossed. Also, both men and women can experience a sense of eternal, overflowing love when, for example, they're in the midst of an erotic encounter. More to the point, marriage isn't conditional love because it isn't love at all. It's a conditional, negotiated agreement. But in the minds of most people, marriage is so much more. Marriage touches people physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Many people think of marriage as a sacrament, a sacred bond before God, and a portal to experiencing God. People who don't think in terms of God might relate this to times when they catch a glimpse of heaven in the eyes of their beloved. Marriage is also considered a nurturing, safe place for privacy and guaranteed intimacy, as well as a lifelong conversation with a best friend, a haven of financial and emotional support and protection, and the grounding for the creation of a family and a loving home. In short, marriage usually begins, like any creative project, with a dream, a vision of the love, happiness, comfort, and joy it can bring. None of these motivations for getting married opposes love. But when the rules and conditions and responsibilities and sky-high expectations of a marriage begin to choke the love that's supposed to be the centerpiece of the relationship, it may be time for a change. Partners can lower their expectations of each other, either temporarily or permanently, and they can readjust the rules of their marriage to allow more freedom so that both partners feel that they can be more of who they really are. Another major opposition that most married people have to grapple with, to some extent, is love versus selfishness. Love versus selfishness may sound similar to the dynamic opposites of passion versus compassion, where we talked about the balance of give and take of self-love versus other love. However, love and selfishness are not dynamic opposites. Passion and compassion are two types of love, and they only function as dynamic opposites when both partners already have the capacity to feel and express both types of love for each other. But in love versus selfishness, at least one partner seems to lack a capacity for compassion in some, many, or all areas of the relationship. I want to emphasize, though, that selfishness is a normal part of human nature. We're all selfish as babies, and I think that's partly because growing as fast as they do in things like basic language development and motor skill development requires a tremendous amount of self-focus. Even grad school students are known to be selfish about sharing time with family and friends, since they have to learn and grow quickly through an intense curriculum. As children grow up, most develop compassion for others and show it at least part of the time. Still, we're all capable of becoming more selfish again under certain circumstances, especially under extreme stress. In fact, a loss of civility in a marriage or in a society may have something to do with extreme stress. Fortunately, most of us are also capable of becoming more unselfish whenever we choose to work at it, and working at it may begin with reducing our own stress levels. But spiritually speaking, extreme selfishness in older children and adults may indicate an unevolved soul, a new soul. Human souls evolve across multiple lifetimes, and in each lifetime we have chances to grow spiritually, partly by gradually enlarging our sense of self to align with others as we find commonality with them. The first step in this evolution is to move from me against the world to you and me against the world. When we find a love interest, a parent, or anyone who reminds us of ourselves. We also expand our sense of self by noticing our commonality with other individuals, including maybe famous statesmen or actors, superheroes, or other cartoon characters. Another part of this evolution involves identifying with groups, members of our social clique, team, or gang, people in our school, workplace, or town, those of our gender, religion, or nationality. This means that forming an in-group and out-group mentality is part of the evolutionary process. Gradually, as more commonalities are perceived, we can begin to identify with more groups beyond our own. And eventually, we strive to identify with all of humanity, all of life, all of existence. But remember, this identity growth process happens according to free choice, not force. And it happens step by step. So, when you observe people who only seem to care about others like themselves and who shun or actively hate people outside their own kind, it's a sign that they're human beings and they're evolving spiritually and they're at a certain stage in the process. And guess what? We're all at a certain stage in the process, just different stages. If you hate the haters, you're a hater. Critics and onlookers who are further along in loving humanity cannot help newer souls evolve by mocking and humiliating them, by name-calling and scolding them, by lecturing them on how wrong they are, or scoffing at their thinking skills. What you as a relatively evolved person can do to help is simply to be loving, accepting, and respectful toward all human beings, even if you disagree with them, even if they insult you. Listen to their point of view first, then speak honestly to their concerns, but in their language, without condescending, insulting, or judging them. And emphasize what you have in common so that they can begin to identify with you and later with people like you. When people feel accepted and loved, warts and all, it's easier for them to listen to others and choose to grow. However, when people feel unaccepted and unloved and are told to grow in ways they may not fully understand or agree with and haven't chosen for themselves, they tend to dig in their heels, refuse to grow, and sometimes erupt with anger, rage, and even violence. This is pertinent both to marriages where partners don't have the same level of spiritual development and to political standoffs. As one of my spirit guides recently told me, the United States has to push back hard to avoid tyranny, but love and understanding need to replace intellect as the guiding force. Please understand, this doesn't mean smart people should stop thinking so much. It means intellect isn't working as the guiding force for social-political healing. Smart people on both sides of the media who hammer their political opponents about what's true are about as effective in winning over their opponents as a smart partner is in a dysfunctional marriage, hammering his or her spouse about what's true. Even when one partner is completely right, everybody loses when love isn't their guiding light. If anything, our best thinkers need to add another component to their intellectual abilities by understanding all different types of people more deeply, and by developing new ways to communicate with compassionate acceptance and deep, deep understanding across personal lines in marriage and political lines in society. As battered women will attest, being right can get you into deep trouble when your rightness triggers your partner's rage. Feelings have their own separate logic and truth, and no couple ever heals when one partner feels clobbered, even with a proven fact. I'll talk more about this in segment 3 of this course, the segment on how to love society, humanity, the world, and life itself. Consistently extreme selfishness, though, may be a telltale sign of a psychopath or sociopath, according to Paul Babiak and Robert D. Hare, authors of the book Snakes in Suits When Psychopaths Go to Work. Psychopathy is a personality disorder. Psychopaths are without conscience and are incapable of empathy, guilt, or loyalty to anyone but themselves. The authors also say some psychopaths live in society and do not technically break the law. Some may lead seemingly normal lives, not hurting people in ways that attract attention, but causing problems nonetheless in hidden economic, psychological, and emotionally abusive ways. They do not make warm and loving parents, children, or family members. Martha Stout, author of The Sociopath Next Door, says that sociopaths are deceptive and often good actors, with their exaggerated interest in others and their crocodile tears. Stout says that one of the main tricks of sociopaths is to manipulate others into feeling sorry for them while scamming them. Most of us are not trained psychologists or psychiatrists and don't know how to diagnose psychopaths or sociopaths, but we all know something about selfishness. Selfishness is a spiritual opposite of love because selfishness is a quality of spirit, like the spirit of every man for himself, instead of the spirit of brotherhood or sisterhood. I believe extremely selfish people are completely passion-driven, meaning that they work to get what they want all the time, because as newer souls, they only perceive their own profound goodness and no one else's. If you find yourself married to or in proximity to an extremely selfish person, I suggest that you first read the books on selfishness I've listed below, or similar books by leading experts to learn about what dangers you may be in. Of course, try to help the person de-stress if that seems to be a major issue. Normal people can have some traits of a sociopath without being one, and stress often brings out their worst side. However, if reduced stress doesn't reduce the person's selfishness, the best advice I can offer is, first, to seek professional help, and second, to make a careful plan to get away from the selfish person as soon as possible. I personally kicked my father out of my life when I was 20 on the advice of my therapist. Although it was very hard for me financially and personally, that decision enabled me to eventually reclaim my sanity. If you are dependent on an abuser, I hope you can find an escape hatch too. So today I've covered two more of love's opposites. The first is love versus marriage, which involves a dynamic opposition of structural limits versus freedom and is only a threat to your love when structure and obligation become overwhelming. The second is love versus selfishness, which is a direct spiritual opposition. To wrap up this segment on love and love's opposites, let's take a look back at what you've just learned. After learning why love given isn't always love received, you heard a fresh, original definition of love anchored to the perception of goodness. Along the way, you heard about different types, elements, and expressions of love. You also learned about many of love's opposites, some partial opposites that hobble love relationships, and some complete opposites that can destroy them. And you've learned about some healthy oppositions within love that, when handled with finesse, make love relationships more interesting and more joyful. So now that you've completed segment 1, I hope you'll continue to analyze the ideas and engage in the brainstorming I've started here. Maybe you can refine my definition of love. No doubt I've not been able to mention all types, elements, and expressions of love, nor would I guess that I've hit on all of the conceivable opposites of love, whether partial or complete opposites. For example, there are plenty more complementary opposites than the ones I've talked about, including dominance versus submission, S&M, Felix types versus Oscar types, and on and on. Mostly, I hope that you'll keep paying attention to what love is and what it isn't in your own life. Please join me again next time when I launch into segment 2 of this course. That segment is entitled Love, Attraction, and Growth. Until then, goodbye.